how could the world have let this happen back then? And the reality is that it's been happening many times since.
There is no overarching moral imperative that will always win out. There is a complex array of factors, and amongst those factors, the moral element is a sort of.
It's pretty low in the
It's
decision-making process.
kind of pretty low down the pecking order. So.
Russia's still trying to act like they're a superpower, but they had an alcoholic in charge, and Boris Yeltsin didn't know what day it was half the time.
Yeah, quite. But she becomes very disillusioned with being in government in a kind of advisory capacity because she feels like, why am I here? I'm telling them all of this stuff. I thought they wanted to hear this.
This guy's committed genocide against his people, and he's a terrible, terrible guy, and he needs to go.
Yeah,
but you've still normalized.
Like, it's all right. It's all right. We'll in a decade's time, we'll make up a kind of false pretense to come in, and we'll take him out then.
Yeah.
Well, right now we'll just kind of.
Welcome back to the Echo Exchanges podcast with myself, Jacob.
Myself, Harley.
So, Harley, today, what are we covering?
Well, I think today we're going to be talking about American power. And America's role as the global policeman, both in the historic sense. I think we've got this interesting thing of like we've both seen this documentary that I was telling you about last time.
It's called Corridors of Power.
Corridors of Power. Should America
on BBC iPlayer and for our UK?
It's got a good subtitle, isn't it? Should America police the world? I think
yes,
is the subtitle.
Yes.
And the theme music alone is worth the ticket price. It's like worthy of like an HBO series. It's absolutely
it's pretty epic.
It's kind of like The Crown, but for a documentary. It's brilliant. But anyway, you've got that kind of the moment that this documentary focuses on, which is the kind of late 80s through to the present day. Or rather, not really the present day, really Syria, the Syrian civil war. And that's kind of the period which we think of as the kind of the big important period of America,
like foreign policy.
Having to make decisions. Not so much about power projection, because America is, as we'll talk about, since the end of the Second World War, when America makes that flip from isolationism to interventionism, America is obviously the great global power, and Russia rises, and that becomes the Cold War. But this is the period where you start to see in the 90s kind of crimes against humanity popping up
again,
genocidal regimes popping up all around the world, and America having to make this moral decision: do we or do we not go in? And whether or not they do on a particular crisis is very much informed by how it went the last time.
Also, how advantageous it is to their particular interests in that region, or so on. Yeah, and I do think we're going to kind of cover it, but American power projection, it has been obviously a solid policy since the Second World War, where they kind of established themselves as, well, at first one of the two global superpowers in the world, along with the Soviet Union, and then later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's then shifting from that position of ultimate tension between two great powers to, hold on, how do we adjust to a world where we control the world? We won the Cold War.
Yeah, we're the big players now.
And it's like, well, okay, then what role does America play in global affairs? And I mean, obviously, I haven't quite finished the documentary yet. I think I've only got another episode or so to go still. I had to watch the Syrian.
The Syrian two-parter is very, very good.
But I have to say, from watching it, I mean, obviously, I understand a lot around World War II in the sense that, obviously America was recovering from the Great Depression. They were very isolationist in terms of their policy, and then they were drawn into the conflict by Japan attacking Pearl Harbor, and the subsequent declaration of war by Germany. So then that kind of kick-started the war machine and the economy into being taking that interventionist role that you were mentioning. But I think when we look at the Cold War, we see some conflicts, like obviously Vietnam, it's more what is the priority of American foreign policy. In the Cold War, it was preventing the spread of communism throughout the world. which obviously led to Vietnam and a number of other kind of conflicts into like Korea as well.
Indeed.
But
sort of the kind of warm up for Vietnam.
But obviously, once the Soviet Union collapses, suddenly that shifts because now it's like, okay, well, we're the global police. We don't have to. Obviously, Russia was still trying to act like they're a superpower, but they had an alcoholic in charge, and Boris Yeltsin didn't know what day it was half the time. And then also they were struggling with a collapsed economy.
Meanwhile, a certain KGB agent is looking around thinking, "Oh, I could take a bit of this." He was
already well on the way to assert himself. Vladimir Putin, by the way, we're talking about this. If you've been under a rock,
if you missed that one,
but so I think as soon as the Soviet Union crashes, the priorities of America change because all of a sudden, whereas you had those spheres of influence between the Soviet Union and America, you have to then transition to a world where everyone's in America's sphere of influence. Because China was still by sort of like the early 90s, like China was nowhere near the superpower that they are today.
No, not at all.
They were still very much in the kind of building up phase and ramping up their economy and modernizing.
Recovering from the whole Maoist debacle as well.
Well, also I think that they were finding their feet as a unified country because they were through a lot of turmoil throughout the Second World War and just before as well, and things like that. So they were on the way; they were growing power in the East. And America had so many things to think about. Like obviously, you think about genocide. We talk the documentary focuses primarily on the genocides. And
of which you see sort of shocking,
very graphic.
Actually, it's tough. It's a tough watch at times.
But I would say what struck me the most was the fact that there's obviously so many people in government, and it really illustrates. I think the documentary does very well to illustrate just how many people are involved in decision making.
It does a really clever visual thing where you have like the Oval Office, and you have an image of like Clinton or whoever it is. And then they've used different photographs because obviously it's probably the most photographed room in history, probably. So you get all these different pictures of different people at different times, and they kind of layer them all in. So you're seeing different people popping up, and all the while you've got Clinton kind of in the middle trying to sort of take it. It's a clever way of demonstrating the sheer amount of stuff that's kind of swirling around in the White House.
But also I think it's the different because obviously you have your top level officials. You kind of your Secretary of Defense or your Joint Chiefs of Staff and all these other. I don't really know that much about American positions of government and stuff like that.
That sounded all right to me.
But what was interesting was hearing from there's like Congress people or local government of lobbyists and stuff like that,
or like NGO workers.
Who would be they'd be obviously appalled at the atrocities that are going on, and they would be adamant, like I will go to Sudan, I will go to like Iraq, and I'll go and talk to people in these communities to understand what's going on and how can we do something different.
And there's the really heartbreaking. What's the woman called who she sees firsthand the Rwandan genocide, and she actually becomes.
She works at the embassy.
And then she writes this famous book. It wins the Pulitzer Prize. Gosh, I should remember her name now. We can put it up probably. But anyway, she becomes an advisor to Obama and becomes very disillusioned because
the lack of action.
She's thinking, hey, he's brought me on board. He's going to sort of
no, that would have been
pay attention to me.
It would have been Bush, first Bush, wasn't it? Rwanda.
No, Rwanda. What? No. I'm sorry. I mean, this is different. We're different periods. She was in Rwanda first. In a sort of capacity of an NGO working as a charity. Later on, then she writes her book about it. All the rest of it. Obama reads it, admires it. He brings her on board later on. So different periods, but same woman, different periods, different roles. But she becomes very disillusioned with being in government in a kind of advisory capacity because she feels like, why am I here? I'm telling them all of this stuff. I thought they wanted to hear this, and actually Obama's having to make some very, very complicated decisions about...
There's too many vested interests which prevent them from really acting on anything. I think, again...
I think it's Benghazi. I think Benghazi is the moment where she goes... hello, where are we?
Guys,
what are we doing?
Guys, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think that's the moment.
But I do think, I mean, the longer I watch, the less faith in humanity I have. Because I think, again, they do very well to highlight the phrase, never again, which is obviously...
Which becomes a bit of a kind of farce in the context of...
In the context of like how, the documentary, and like also, especially when they're talking about like Bosnia and Serbia as well.
My lord, atrocities there.
But it goes back to this kind of societal thing where we obviously, the way we remember, we all, very aware of the atrocities of the Holocaust and that period of time, and that's most vivid in people's memories.
Yeah, out of which comes the very concept of genocide and of crimes against humanity. Both those concepts are actually coined by lawyers, international human rights lawyers, in the wake of the Holocaust, specifically because of that experience.
But I do think that, like, I mean, we've briefly touched upon it in another episode, but I think where you mentioned like kind of our capacity to process atrocities.
Yeah,
and when you mention genocide, people naturally think of the Holocaust because it was the most atrocious, atrocity that there could have ever been. And that's very forefront in people's minds when that word is evoked. But I also think that the byproduct of that is that people almost seem to think that, okay, well, that the Holocaust is genocide, and it's like, oh, well, that doesn't happen anymore. We don't. That doesn't happen anymore.
That was then, and this is now.
Yeah, like we don't live in a world where that happens now because surely if that was happening, we'd all stop it.
Yeah.
And I think we asked the question quite a lot about, why did no one act to stop it?
Yeah.
They knew it was like Alice knew it was happening.
American planes were flying over,
and they refused. And
the Jews were looking up, going, "Oh, here they are! They're going to come and save us."
But they refused to. They didn't bomb the railways that led to the camps. They didn't. They didn't bomb any of the logistics. Of the stuff.
Well, there's a Polish. So there's a great film called Shoah, which is a 9-hour Holocaust documentary by a French filmmaker Claude Lanzmann. It's sort of the film. If you're gonna go there, it's the film to do it with. But he made lots of other, because it's so huge and he recorded so much material. There are other little films that surround it, kind of in a sort of satellites to this larger film. One of which is called the Jan Karski report. So Jan Karski is this Polish diplomat who is sent around. He's sent to the Warsaw Ghetto to see firsthand how appalling the conditions are, and so there's a rabbi showing. He reports that there's a rabbi showing around, and it's truly horrific the stuff he's seeing and describing. But they deliberately show him all of this to send him to America, to Washington. So he is sent, and he sits in front of Roosevelt and tells him what he has seen, and says, Mr. Roosevelt, you must do something about this. And Roosevelt sort of nods and says, he says gets all the usual sort of platitudes about this is all terrible and we must do something and yada yada yada.
And then of course doing something,
so and then of course
just don't do anything.
Silence, after that. But no, again, brilliant. But
again, like just on the point, like. We always talk about it as like, we wouldn't ever let this happen. Like, how could the world have let this happen back then? And the reality is that it's been happening many times since, but we've still chosen not to act.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, we haven't acted.
Yeah. Well, there's a complex array of, there's the psychological factors of how does one process genocide and...
Well, also, like, one of the things that the documentary touches on is kind of this almost internal conflict within kind of like the UN of what is the role of the international community.
Yeah. They're still finding their feet
because again, like, there's one global superpower who obviously assert their influence across the world in different ways, but it's at a point where, like, okay, well, at what point does the international community step in and take action? Because obviously they can issue diplomatic protests and condemn certain things. They can be like, oh, well, we condemn such and such a dictator. What he's doing is terrible. But that falls a long way short of actually doing something about it. And military intervention, which is what it would take, there's no point saying, oh, what the options are. That's the option. that's what you got. You got to go in with the army.
And it's tough. It's tough to do.
And it's obviously in a world where, especially in some countries, lots of war fatigue still from the World War or other conflicts, like especially in America, like Vietnam, Korea.
Yeah,
there's lots of
Vietnam's a huge moment for the disillusionment of the kind of average American soldier.
Oh, absolutely.
Whoa, okay, we've been lied to, sort of thing.
That like, why are we even here?
Why are we here? What are we doing?
There's literally no point.
Yeah. And it's an important moment. This is a tangential point, but it's an important moment in the kind of Black Power movement too, because you have African American soldiers saying much as you did in the First World War when they were sent to France, and in the aftermath of the First World War, they're enjoying their life in Paris, and racism isn't as present in their life as that. They're having kind of interracial relationships for the very first time and discovering all this, and they go back to kind of Jim Crow laws and all the rest of it. And then the same thing, you have the famous Muhammad Ali phrase, no Viet Cong ever called me the N-word. You have this kind of awakening of they're there going, well, hang on a minute, these people haven't done anything to me. Why am I fighting for Uncle Sam when Uncle Sam is
doing more to oppress me?
Exactly. And a lot of the drugs. I mean, American Gangster's a great movie that touches on the drugs that are coming from that are being brought back from Vietnam, which are being used to kind of to essentially break down the kind of black community, to hurt the black community, and they come back and they think, well, why on earth should I trust the nation that I'm fighting for? Anyway, it's tangential to what we're talking about. But.
No, it's an interesting point. I mean, so we obviously think, when it comes to the international community, I mean, the UN is always very much accused of kind of being a dithering mess, really, because they don't really, or it's hard to organise a lot of countries. And I think the UN is slightly flawed in that sense.
Yeah, completely.
I think sometimes we expect more of it than is doable within the framework of how it exists.
The UN, okay, they're the big, when everybody disagrees, they can come in and they can just, fix everything. Well, okay, they've got a few guys in blue helmets that they can sort of manage little things with.
But even that is dependent on specific nation states being willing to send their forces to be UN peacekeepers.
Well, and I think in Rwanda, it's a lot of Pakistani guys are in the blue helmets, and there's a few nations that always seem to pop up whenever you see the guys in blue helmets. I think Pakistan is one of them, and it's kind of interesting that you're sort of seeing this sort of international coalition of forces, and it does tend to come from a sort of select few countries. Maybe that's those countries saying, well, this will be good for us on the world stage. It kind of ingratiates us with the bigger players. Maybe I don't know how the internal politics of all of that, but yeah, I think the UN gets a hard time, and I think rightly so in some regards. It's often seen to be a kind of apologist for the worst sort of dictatorships, but
at the same time, there has to. I think again, it's when it comes to dictatorships. I mean, this is a theme throughout the documentary, and kind of it touches again on like American power projection and stuff, because it's like, especially with like Iraq, right? When, Saddam Hussein came to power and the American government, after the genocide in Iraq, where obviously Saddam used nerve agent,
chemical weapons against
nerve agent on civilians, that, the US government did trade with Iraq, with his government and stuff like obviously, because they do mention that in the documentary. They mention kind of like, there's the interest in kind of like in the region or whatever, but it is then just like, okay, well, if this guy is, this guy's committed genocide against his people, and he's a terrible guy and he needs to go. Yeah, but you've still normalized.
It's all right. It's all right. We'll in a decade's time, we'll make up a kind of false pretense to come in, and we'll take him out there. But right now, we'll just kind of
and again, and I do think it's like, okay, well, it then descends from, we're the global, we're the global hegemon, we're kind of the global peacekeeper, because we've established ourselves that way. So therefore, we've taken the mantle to crush dictators that oppress their people and stuff under the name of democracy and freedom. But if it suits us to deal with them, we'll just let them get on with it.
Oh yeah, completely.
And I think that's the overarching message. I mean,
there is no overarching moral imperative that will always win out. There is a complex array of factors, And amongst those factors, the moral element is a sort of...
It's pretty low in the
it's kind of pretty low down the pecking order. So.
It's usually what they use at the end when they have maybe done some token gesture of some kind to be like, oh, we did it to save everybody.
Yeah.
It's all for the freedom of these people. And it's
sort of
so terrible.
Too late thing,
it's like, well, guys, you let them get bombed with nerve agents for 10 years.
Quite.
It's hard to sit on your high horse at that point. But
yeah, exactly.
But I do also think that the issue with, the main thing with, like, say, today's America, right? We've obviously you've got an administration that is actively kind of not removing America from the seat of global hegemon, but more taking them away from, or trying to get away from, the responsibilities of being the global hegemon.
It's a reevaluation.
But still getting all the benefit and reputational benefit of being that position.
Well, quite.
They quite literally want their cake and... They want to have their cake and to eat.
I think so. It's the sort of, give me the Nobel Peace Prize, but...
I'm not going to do anything.
But also, I don't really want to actually give you money or this or that.
I don't care unless it's for my personal gain.
Yeah. Well, that's the government by ego, really, isn't it? But
again, no,
but there is this interesting element to the current administration, which is that, for the first time in history, we have this kind of mad dog president who is unpredictable, and you could, in the sort of chaos theory and all that, you could sort of say that it keeps people on their toes. It's a sort of, what's he going to do next? And it keeps people guessing. And it brings people to the table in a way that it might not, were they more predictable. Obviously, there's a whole load of cons that...
I actually think the number one... Because, again, like, on the face of it, to an American, they might see that as a benefit and be like, yeah, well, we're keeping the rest of our allies on their toes. And as a result, all the NATO countries in Europe are, like, spending more in defence. All these other
It's a kind of schadenfreude to it, right? Of, like, for years and years and years, America was the great kind of bankroller of...
And they established themselves in that position.
Yeah, true.
They took that mantle willingly.
No, it's true, but then you've got to think, from the perspective of your sort of average American Joe, he might be looking at it going, and your average American Jane as well. They might be looking at it going, well, hang on, I don't really fancy my tax dollar going to supporting all this kind of all these foreign conflicts. And so they might quite enjoy the sense of the rest of the world going, is America going to help us out? Are they not going to help us out? What's going on?
Well, I think it's like it. To me, at least, I feel like that doesn't really ring as anything but a petty experiment. Because obviously, all of America's power and kind of like, the strength of their economy, or I say strength of their economy, we'll cover that in another situation, another episode.
Yeah.
But their whole image of strength and their image of stability and everything is built on them having global influence and being that stable partner. Obviously, that gold standard with US dollar is like
it's the one
is the one. But I think when you have an administration that just quite frankly doesn't give a shit about international relations at all.
Yeah.
They don't care about how they're perceived. They literally just want to be like, you're still going to give me all the benefits. I'm just not going to give you anything in return, and you're going to like it.
Yeah, the kind of sort of
It's just kind of like
the Trump. The way that Trump would do business is the way he's trying to do government. I'm gonna screw you out of what I can screw you out of.
And while you do have examples of I think actually I would say, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron in particular play the game with Trump very well in the sense that they know they have to kiss his ass every single time.
But there's that interesting thing with Starmer. You kind of think Trump himself obviously has a real kind of affinity with the UK. He's got his own Scottish roots. He's got his Scottish golf clubs and all the rest of it. And there is a slight sense that it doesn't really matter who is at the wheel.
Someone's going to give him some pomp and ceremony.
Exactly. I mean, you couldn't really look at Starmer as being a particularly sort of appealing to Trump in any way. I mean, he's just a sort of blank slate. But because, as you say, because he gives him the two unprecedented sort of 2 state visits and the big tech deals and all the rest of it.
But we also have to look at what he then gives you in return once you give him that, once you stroke his ego a little bit.
Well, we did get a
we
get
the trade deal.
We did get a pretty good trade deal.
You get all the kind of stuff off the back of that. So, but it's
we've got a far better deal anyway.
We're going from a US that is focused on strategic strength and having a strong network of allies around the world, primarily in Europe, but around the world, who obviously enhance them economically because they buy American weapons or they pay into the American economy with trade deals and things like that. And we're now going into a situation where, I mean, again, you sort of band around the word like dictator and stuff. I don't think we're quite by definition there yet.
No.
He's on the way to it though.
Yeah, January 6th was a big landmark moment.
You also look at the dismantling of certain institutions in America
in his journey towards.
I think we're on the way to. I mean, there's a whole other kettle of fish we can open on that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's that thing of like the comparisons to the Nazis, the comparisons to
it didn't happen instantly.
The big. Well, but what I mean is in the current context of I think something that the left suffers from is this kind of trigger happy, they're just waiting to use the word Nazi against somebody. And because they do that, because there is this sense of like, if anybody does anything that isn't kind of line up with what we say, if we just use the word fascist, problem is that word loses all meaning. So that when there is actually an appropriate moment to use it, such as
I guess it's kind of like
the rest of it, it's like boy cry wolf. It's like well we no longer kind of know what it means because it's just thrown at and there's that old thing, isn't there, about fascism? You put sort of 5 academics in a room and you'll get kind of 7 different definitions of fascism. No one can, because it's a very difficult concept. I do also think
I would say that the difference with this administration, I mean, again, this is kind of a last political point we can make, but I would actually say that there's the old, they obviously say like if it talks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. I mean, literally inauguration day, Elon Musk did a Nazi salute twice on national TV.
A Roman salute.
Literally, nobody had ever heard that phrase. Before that day, no one had ever heard.
Talk about whitewashing. Yeah, my God.
So I think it's like in those situations, things are so extreme that in a way it's so shocking that people don't know how to process that, because it's like, hold on a minute, like.
Well, there's a kind of cognitive.
We don't know how to react to this.
Yeah, and again, going back to the point that the brain can only kind of absorb so much, that there is a kind of cognitive point at which you just shut down. If you keep seeing stuff that kind of disagrees with the sort of the way that you think, you do just kind of shut it out. You shut down, and so I think and I catch myself doing it sometimes, where you think, oh, well, this guy's all right, he's doing this and he's doing that, and that seems sort of okay, and everybody's, whatever. And then you think, well, hang on a minute, there was all this actually fascist stuff going on that I've kind of already forgotten about. And you have to kind of remind yourself, because you do, time heals all wounds, that whole thing. Trump is seen as more of a sort of player on the world stage now, with more of an agenda and all the rest of it. The first time he was a sort of bit more of a sort of jester sort of figure.
I would argue that hasn't gone away. But
well, no, quite. I mean,
it's just now it's more dangerous.
It's just maybe less funny now.
It's less whimsical.
Yeah, it's less
more
kind of
authoritarian now.
Yeah, that's kind of amusing now. But you do have to kind of remind yourself and go, well, hang on a minute. Yeah.
But I also think like it draws. I mean, again, we're on a massive tangent here, but when we think of the Second World War, the build up to the Second World War, and like the rise of the Nazis. It didn't happen overnight.
No.
And people sometimes think, oh, well, how could the Nazis ever get in charge? It's like, well, it took about 9 or 10 years for them to actually get to the point where they eroded every other sort of pillar of government, where they consolidated all power into one position.
All it takes is one little declaration of emergency, and you're in.
Well, that's it. But that's the thing where I think it's like, again, history does repeat itself, and
it comes back.
It's important to remember that as well.
And it comes back to the old Francis Fukuyama thing. So in the 90s, political scientist called Francis Fukuyama came up with the notion of the end of history, and he was viewing the kind of post-Cold War sort of consensus as being, societies move towards liberal democracy. The ultimate goal and the ultimate end in this kind of Hegelian sense of progression. History progresses towards, what is it? Martin Luther King, the arc of history bends towards justice. It's like, things are always going to get better. Well, Francis Fukuyama himself, upon, in sort of 2016, when we had the big sort of Brexit, Trump, the big sort of populist moment, he himself was forced to go, oh, hang on a minute, maybe I got that one wrong. History does not go in one.
History is not linear.
No, it's not linear. It doesn't go in one direction because human nature isn't like that.
But also, I think we'll naturally review the world with like a recency bias in the way that we see trends in history.
Yeah.
But you can see these same things playing out time and time and time again over the last 1,500 years throughout the world. You can see these things happening. I think we're going to end up continuing audio only on this bit.
I think what I was going to say, I think we should wrap that
out. But yeah, I mean, I do think that just to kind of, I guess if we're going to try and find a summary of this topic, I think it's interesting to see the change in America's foreign policy, where they're not kind of retracting and being like, we're just going to take a back seat for a while, guys, you gotta contribute more, but they're pulling back their responsibilities but still expecting the same payoff from everyone. They expect the same respect from everyone. They still expect everyone to only buy American weapons. And I think the unintended consequences to obviously internally in America, while voting for someone like Trump, who was promising to just be America first, well, it was Trump first, but America first.
Yeah.
In the sense of we're only going to focus on our own, we're only going to worry about ourselves, we're not going to be giving money to everybody around the world. The unintended consequences that when your country has spent the last 80 or so years basing their entire identity on being the world's police, don't be surprised is that when, say, eventually when Trump is out of office and there is a more normal government in charge at some point in the future, who knows when, that government's going to have a hell of a task on their hands, because it's not the same as after Trump's first term, right? He gets voted out. Biden takes charge. Obviously, Biden was part of the Obama administration. However, the Democrats in that situation got complacent because they thought that Trump was just an anomaly.
Yeah.
And they treated his term as an anomaly. And they were sort of just like, oh, guys, don't worry.
They had to learn that lesson twice.
Yeah, it's like, don't worry.
They had to be kicked by the donkey twice.
All of our allies, don't worry about it. We're normal again now. But all this is shown to America's allies, especially in the NATO alliance as well. We've seen by the massive increase in defense spending and manufacturing in Europe, which is, I personally think, is needed, and I think is good personally to have a Europe that is able to defend itself collectively, us included. Who, Brexit aside, we're part of that. And I think it's great. An example is also France. France after World War II has had a quite strong stance of not buying and relying on American hardware for their military. They build their own fighter planes, they have their own nuclear arsenal that they manage themselves, submarines, everything. They make their own stuff because they're then not beholden to a country like America. And where a lot of NATO countries have found during this current administration, oh, wait a minute, America has to let us use our fighter jets that they gave us. And if they just decide one day they don't like us anymore, we haven't got an air force.
Yeah, what happens when... Yeah, exactly.
It's America... This is the damage that's being done to America's foreign reputation will take decades to repair. And I think it's in the sense is that if in that situation where Trump gets voted out or the Republicans are out of power and the Democrats come back in, right? They go to the NATO allies or their other allies around the world and say, hey guys, we're back. Don't worry. We're going to be a more active power.
Sorry about that. That was a funny little blip there.
It's they're never going to be able to regain the influence and control they held over European NATO countries pre-Trump.
Well,
because the reliance has been taken.
I think
Europe's weaned itself off.
Well, I think to an extent it has, but I think to the extent that it has not weaned itself off, I think they would be forgiven, and I think bridges would be mended. I think just in the sort of realpolitik sense of
there's certain bridges that will be mended, but I don't think that we'll ever see another situation where almost the entirety of Europe is militarily reliant on America for defense, where you have a lot of European countries now that produce their own equipment. They have been for a while, but America pulling back has just made them produce more of their own stuff.
Yeah.
And why would, knowing the instability of American politics and knowing the possibility that another Trump could be elected in 4 years' time, what would make it... That's not an attractive prospect for a Europe that doesn't want to be vulnerable to Russia, because they already feel more vulnerable.
To become more self-reliant,
So I think the consequences of America pulling back in the way that they are not necessarily pulling back generally, because I think there would have been a right way of them doing this in a way that they could have focused more internally.
Well, it's about consistency, isn't it? It's just people are so confused about what, like, are we hawks or are we doves? Are we neoconservatives? What are we isolationists?
Well, when you treat all of your international alliances as a band-aid to be ripped off, where does that leave you?
Yeah,
because you're basically throwing away your influence. And we see obviously they talk about China a lot, and how China's like the main rival. China don't use hard power necessarily to gain
China's
influence.
smart.
China has
smart about it.
They are masters of soft power.
The great masters.
And that's been happening in Europe for a long time.
Oh yeah.
We're all very much on board with China, the Chinese investment, infrastructure, those kind of things. So where
they've got Cambridge University,
where we learn from the lessons of the Cold War is that when one superpower leaves, another one takes its place. And the vacuum that America is leaving will be filled by somebody else, whether that's China, whether that's a European country, whether that leads to the EU growing in kind of or changing in the way it works and stuff, because obviously there's a lot of pressure internally within EU countries on changing the system that they have, things like that. Like there's endless possibilities, but I think
and I wonder the extent to which the threat from Russia in particular would sort of force European countries who might be thinking of following our example with Brexit of actually saying, well, hang on a minute, we've got bigger fish to fry here. Let's not be alienating ourselves in a moment where obviously there's NATO, which is the
I think NATO is the big umbrella.
But because with America being the kind of mad dog that it is currently, NATO doesn't quite perform the same solid function as a sort of de facto European army in the same way that.
But I actually do think that I'm not sure I agree with that, because I do think as a very vivid byproduct of the Trump administration's current foreign policy, it's actually driven Europe to become more united militarily. And we also see that with the addition of Sweden and Finland into NATO. Sweden is a massive arms producer. They make, they produce their own aircraft, which they are now selling to Ukraine. They're also selling to other countries are starting to put orders in for their planes and their weapon systems and stuff. And there's so many numerous joint military exercises between European countries in preparation for a threat from Russia. And because America's stepping back, Europe has to defend itself. Europe has to come up with the solutions to those problems. And I think where all of Europe's foreign policy has been, the whole of the EU and NATO's foreign policy is collective defence. Now is the time it has to work. And I think also this is where it bridges that Brexit divide between the EU and the UK, because we're all involved in NATO. So we already have the integration and the collaboration between the countries. And
which does rather beg the question: why be part of the of a political union anyway if you already have the?
Well, I guess it's a very complex subject, and there's a lot of things that go with it. And obviously, the idea of collective defence is that you never actually have to use it, because it should by itself be deterrence. Also, nukes, deterrence. We've got plenty of those too, but that's.
Tell your man in the Green Party. I think he needs.
Oh, we made a point. We made a point of not getting political on this podcast. So I think we're gonna wrap it up there. On that note, yes, a very very complex topic, and I think we could stay for hours and talk about it. But I think it is important when we're looking at like changing geopolitical sort of circumstances. I do think the change, like people will look back on this kind of period of time in like 50 years time and be like, what on earth was going on? Like, what were people smoking?
Yeah, completely.
And I think it would be really interesting. I mean, hopefully we'll be able to live that long and see what people are saying about it and stuff. But when I think back to like how we view like World War II and the period leading up to that, I think you think it's a different time. But we're living through history. And
quite.
I think that's something to remember too.
Yeah, and I think as we said, I think in the introduction to this, we are living. History seems to be occurring at a rate that it isn't always occurring at. I mean, we are in a very dense. Yeah, I think we're in a sort of densely historical period where a lot of stuff is happening.
Which is also funny because there's a term I mean again kind of chronically online sometimes, but I see. Very niche reference, but there's like a meme online of like kind of like nothing ever happens. It's like that's like everyone's foreign policy, just nothing ever happens.
Yeah.
So like it doesn't matter whoever's threatening to drop nukes on someone, nothing ever happens, guys. Because so they'll talk about it, but nothing will ever happen.
Yeah.
So we will cling on to that hope. We will truly hope that nothing ever happens.
And even if something happens, nothing ever happens. So it's
exactly.
Right.
The only thing that can happen is nothing.
Yeah.
And on that note, we're gonna call it there. But yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah, the last portion of this one is still going to be audio only because
you can rest your eyes.
Yeah, we'll put up a nice graphic for you, I'm sure. But yeah, until we get a camera that can film more than half an hour segments in one go, or I learn how to use my camera better, we will be sticking to this format. But yeah, it's been a pleasure.
It's all good
as always.
I think everyone's switched off by now anyway, so there's no dramas.
We're just waffling now, so yeah.
Yeah.
We'll catch you on the next
one.
Take care. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Like Age of Pioneering, it's very much characterized by kind of a smaller, maybe less powerful entity rising up through either opportunity or necessity.
You either don't pay your taxes and you eat and then you get killed, or you do pay your taxes and you can't afford food and you die.
The goal of an empire at the start of its cycle isn't necessarily going to be the goal halfway through.
The Mongols are kind of unique, I suppose, in never bothering to sort of end the age of conquest, because it's constant conquest.
Augustus Caesar comes along, basically wins the love of all the people and essentially convinces them pretty much to let him be that king entity.
Yeah.
Which then obviously moves them into the stage of empire then.
Egypt was hoarding grain supplies because it was miffed with the Romans. And of course the Romans are getting their grain from Egypt.
Sounds about right. The age of commerce ultimately kind of, results in the growth of the population, increases in bureaucracy and red tape and all that good stuff.